Monsanto has followed a vegetarian diet since 1978 and has been vegan since 1993, driven by her passion for health, sustainability, and animal welfare. Welcome so much, Vesanto.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's good.
it was much tougher back then to be vegetarian and vegan as it is nowadays.
Oh, it was. I was thinking back, it was kind of a hippie thing to do. Yeah. I was teaching university, but I had hippie sympathies. Yeah. And then
Right.
I went to India for 4 years.
You're
And
wow.
yeah, and that really helped me be vegetarian because they know how to do it well. That was before I became vegan. Yeah. And then when we wrote our first book, we had a chapter called Without Dairy. And I was writing it with my co-author Brenda Davis, and I thought, oh, I could do this, and so I could leave. It was just these nutrients are in places other than dairy because our food guides then said it was essential, and the dairy farmers actually wrote a 45-page booklet against our book and
That
gave
must
it
have felt
out
good.
internationally. And that made our book a bestseller, though. That was traumatic at the time.
So Brenda Davis is wildly popular with our audience here, and my understanding is that you are her mentor. Is that a
I
accurate?
guess, when I started off, I was running a bit ahead of her. Now she's leaps and bounds. But we have an advantage here. We have her son, Corey, who will be joining us on this. And we were co-authors on this plant-powered protein book. So he's online right now. And when we have the second part of this presentation, like after an hour, he'll be joining us, and he's brilliant about sustainability. So a government agrologist and an environmentalist and
All right.
good speaker. Yeah.
Great. Well, we're
Okay,
looking forward to everything you have to share with us today.
great. Okay, thanks. So I'm going to share my screen now. Hello, everyone. Is it all shared? Okay. So
There we go. Now we can see.
good. Okay. So this presentation is certainly about all the environmental impacts of our dietary choices and also some practical tips. So we'll explore what effects our dietary choices have on greenhouse gas emissions, water use, water pollution, land use, and land acidification, and how do popular diets compare in terms of carbon footprints. Practical tips for those who want to move forwards, including for all stages of the life cycle. And in a more sustainable diet, what might we be eating for breakfast, lunch, and supper? And we'll have Corey Davis on in this next second segment. So here are pictures of Brenda Davis at 66, very fit woman. Myself at 90, no, not 93, 83. I just turned that last week. And Corey Davis, who will be joining us, Brenda's son. And we've all been vegan for decades. So we co-authored this book together. And it's always such a pleasure to collaborate. I've been collaborating with Brenda for, I guess, 33 years now writing, and we're still good buddies. I'm glad to be friends with her son now too. So, um, whoops. I wonder in the audience if you'd think, were you or was anyone you knew affected by climate change in recent years? I've got pictures here of New York. We were in New York. I was on a speaking tour, and about a year and a half ago, and there were these floods. One woman drowned in our hotel room, or an Airbnb, really. The roof started falling in. The plaster was falling on our suitcases because of so much rain on the roof that the gutters that deal with rain just couldn't manage it. The next picture is British Columbia, where my son and my daughter live. They have properties near each other, and the fire ended up 300 people lost their homes. They had to evacuate for 3 weeks while this fire was going on. And the only good thing about it, my grandson loved being in a hotel and he could order food that he wanted off the menu. He hadn't had that experience before, but it was really a tragic event other than that. And Silver Creek in North Carolina, floods, and I think a number of people lost their lives in that incident. And Pacific Palisades, we've all been shocked at what happened since this winter and the fires. So just think if you know people that have had these things happen to them. I think we're all getting so we do. This is about climate change and looking at the top line. The green line is if we manage to hold our global warming limited to below 1.5 degrees centigrade. And this allows us to have sustainable development. If we manage that, and it's really challenging for countries to do this, and we're hoping that they will be able to, we will be able to, then we can expect an outcome of low global warming events, well-being, low poverty, ecosystem health, equity, and justice. And as I worked on this presentation, it really hit me hard that this is important. This is going to lead to tragedies for so many families, like what happened to my kids, neighbors, and worse than that for a lot of people. It's just going to be a tragedy if we don't manage to limit the global warming. And in that case, it will be the opposite. The red and yellow lines will have widespread vulnerability and poverty, people being homeless, people without water. It'll just be a tragic situation. So this was from the United Nations Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change and their book. And I've put links on these slides just to show. So, as I thought about this, I realized that world peace begins in the kitchen, and families can be making food together, well sustained, or they can be in tragic situations. And if we can manage to limit the global surface warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius, as recommended in the Paris Agreement, and what people agreed to, and I'll show you a little bit more about that later. The yearly average global surface temperatures, if we wonder what this 1.5 degrees Celsius means, the pre-industrial era from 1850 to 1900 is considered the standard that we compare with, and we look to not go 1.5 degrees centigrade more than that. And you can see how things have changed. I mean, it's just drastic what's happening, and we hope it doesn't keep going up like that. With the IPCC, scientists have volunteered their time to assess thousands of scientific papers each year and provide a comprehensive summary about what's known about climate change and their impacts. I've been a dietitian for a long time, over 60 years. And of course, these were things we weren't even looking at until really a decade or two ago. We started, and there's new interest and tremendously new scientific insight about what's going on with global warming. So one of the people that was very interesting about this topic is Joseph Poor of Oxford. And over 5 years, I think he took 5 years to write a paper, and one year he completely took off his work in Oxford and he collaborated with a Swiss man, Thomas Nemesek, and they consolidated food production data from 38,700 farms and 1,600 processors worldwide, right from the beginning of getting fertilizer to the crops that would be used for fodder or used to produce food, to finishing and packaging, the whole, every step of the way. And by the way, 17% is transported internationally. And they found that the impact could vary 50-fold among producers of the same product. And they looked at 40 different categories of food and 5 main indicators of climate change. And you'll see the links here. Joseph Poor also has a project at Oxford, at the Oxford Martin, and the link for that is here as well, where they're looking at all sorts of aspects of environmental. So the 5 main indicators of environmental impact are, first of all, greenhouse gas emissions, which he stated were 26% from food and agriculture, and more recent papers have said 30% of the greenhouse gas emissions come from food and agriculture. Land use, so about 50% of the land that we could be on, excluding the deserts and just rocky areas and snow areas, is for food and agriculture. Water use, 78%, huge amount, is for food and agriculture. And in scarce water regions, that can be 90%. And you can just imagine when people are limited for this very essential item that we need, water, that it's just devastating. And water pollution, so 78% of that is from food and agriculture. And acidifying emissions, down at the lower right corner, you'll see a pig farm viewed from aerially in North Carolina. And the pink area is a manure lagoon. And of course, these lagoons can leak and they can break or overflow when it rains too much. And so it's just very important. And the people around also have devastating effects on their breathing and the air quality. So what Joseph Poor did was look at these categories of food and see exactly what were the greenhouse gas emissions from each of the different categories of food. So you'll see at the top, beef herd, and the red lines are animal flesh products. That includes farmed fish or prawns, and dairy products and eggs are the animal products that aren't flesh. Cheese and eggs and so on are in yellow lines, and then the plant foods are in green lines. And you see the distribution in terms of the greenhouse gas emissions, so that beef herd produces 31 times more greenhouse gas emissions than tofu, and poultry 3 times as much. So there's strong differences. So even when farmers are working really hard to be environmentally conscious, like there's such a vast difference. We also see dairy herd up higher. There's beef herd and dairy herd because, of course, the cows that produce milk become hamburgers when they're about 6 years old. They're taken because they're not producing milk as efficiently. So that's the beef from dairy herds. And these are in kilograms of CO2 equivalents. The Journal of Animal Science has reported some changes, and animal agriculture accounts for over 52% of our methane emissions in North America. And cattlemen are trying really hard. A lot of strategies, managing herd health, breeding, decreased herd size, feed quality, managing manure, and to get this situation improved. But just the process of feeding huge amounts of fodder to animals is causing these huge amounts of greenhouse gas emissions. So sometimes we've thought that the grass-fed beef were not as carbon intensive. And but it turns out from a paper that just came out this year, very, very recently, that grass-fed beef are equally as intensive as the industrial beef, despite any attempts at changing sequestration or getting the carbon to go back into the earth. And I lived on a cattle ranch for a year or so, 3,000 head of cattle, and saw them out grazing and being loaded into the trucks, and then they'd be trucked across to Cargill processing plants to be for the big feedlots, and then to be slaughtered, and then the meat would come back. And I just remember how complicated the whole process was. So they're not just happily out there on the range. If you recall from Poor's earlier study about CO2 emissions, that the beef production leads to 10 times more greenhouse gas emissions than poultry, 31 times more greenhouse gas emissions than from tofu, and 55 times more greenhouse gas emissions than from pulses. And because this is British, Oxford, they call beans, peas, and lentils pulses. So even with the attempts that they can do, and appreciate they are trying that, the greenhouse gas emissions are still far from the plant-based options that we can pick. And the references for these are here on each slide. So what to choose? And beef production also, as you'll see in some other slides, causes more problems with land use, irrigation, fertilizer requirement. And so it's only 5 to 20% of the calories in a US diet, but the production of beef dominates the food production resource use in the US and globally, undermining diet's sustainability. Here are some options that can be picked instead made from beans or tofu. If we look at water pollution, you'll again see that the beef, the dairy, and also the farmed fish are up there too. There all sorts of farmed plant foods are fed to the fish, and also some ground up animal products, and sinks to the bottom and is causing problems with the waterways and also contaminating the wild fish. So all these farmed aquaculture systems are causing problems as well. And tofu's way, way down, circled in green, lower down. These are grams of phosphate equivalents, and they're based on the pollutants, pesticides, herbicides, fertilizers, manure, drug residues that the animals get, like antibiotics and growth hormones. So all these things are causing problems. And acidifying emissions. So this is when the manure lagoons leak and problems that are caused in the soil and land around these different intensive farming operations. So again, we see that cattle and even poultry are way higher. I know the poultry farms that have all the manure, I mean, it's vast amounts are produced, and people just don't know what to do with it. It leaks out. Now, I've got a tickle in my throat. Excuse me for that. Yeah. So in land use, again, we find that the red meats, lamb, mutton, beef are way at the top, again, compared to tofu, which is circled below. And cheese is up there too. Cheese was high in the water. I think I didn't mention that. But the beef herd uses about 105 times more land than tofu. Of course, when you're feeding soybeans and beans and grains to these cows, as whether it's after they're grazing and when they're in the finishing lots, or just their intensive operations their whole life, they use huge amounts of fodder. Next, I wanted to say that if you're interested in these, and I've actually found them more fascinating that when I dived into it all, there are charts on a website, our food, ourworldindata.org, and then look at the environmental impacts of food. And these charts can be adjusted, like they have it beautifully set up. So you can look at land use we were looking before per kilogram of food, but you can change it so you're looking at per 100 grams of protein. So you compare all the protein providing foods specifically together. And you can also look at per calorie. So you can see it different ways. They have really beautifully set up. And so I was deeply touched by the magnitude of the challenges we face in changing this whole situation. But I think it's very important how people start to realize that red meat and even cheese and milk are causing huge problems. In about a year and a half ago, I'd been invited to speak in Costa Rica and went to stay with a friend down there. And I was amazed that how much of the forests in Costa Rica were being leveled so that they could have cattle. A lot of the Brazilian forests are being cleared, what I thought would be for cattle, but it's actually the soybeans and plants that are grown there are brought up for chickens, so for chicken production, because people are shifting a bit more towards chicken, and huge amounts of fodder is needed. This is from the IPCC, International Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, and just shows a bit about how since 10,000 years ago, there were forests and grasslands. People weren't occupying that much space. And then how it's changed now so that so much of the land is, let's see, I've got to click something here. Um, 71% of our land surface is shown in the top bar, and that's the part that isn't barren, desert, glaciers, or rocks. So this is the part that is considered forests or shrubs back then. And now we find that 46% of this land is now used for agriculture. And most of that is used, 77% is used to grow fodder to animals. So only 23% of what we've taken from the forest and grasslands is now used to grow food for humans. Big change. In terms of water use, this is one where this is about the last one for the environmental aspects of various specific foods. But we find cheese at the very top. You can imagine that's a very condensed milk product. And it's using huge amounts. The dairies seem to use huge amounts of water to keep everything clean. They can't use apparently rainwater off the roof that's captured. They have to keep everything very, very clean. The dairy cattle drink a lot of water, and somehow huge amounts of water used for cheese production. I also found for nuts that there was high water use. So this is the time that a plant food gets up to the top level. And I remember from going down I-5 in California, seeing on one side of the road that there was desperate need for water, and the trees, as they were orange trees, that had just dried up and died over the last few decades. And the other side of the road was getting water. It seems to be a very political situation in many cases. And so it turns out that nuts like almonds, which are grown in California and other places, but they take a lot of water. And sometimes, I know with Miyoko's cheeses, she was getting cashews from, I think, North Vietnam or a country near there, where it was natural rainfall. But still, the cheeses do use a lot of water, and the nut cheeses too can. Farmed fish use surprising because they're fed so many crops. It's quite amazing when you get into this. And these charts, by the way, are in our plant-powered protein book by Brenda Davis and Corey Davis and I. So next, if we look at popular diets, so this isn't like single foods. This is um, people are adopting, they feel overweight, they go on the keto diet and just leave out carbs and try for just the animal products and vegetables. Paleo diets, and I put paleo in quotation marks because actually the first 80% of the paleo period, they were basically plant-based. They hadn't figured out how to kill animals very well. So but what's considered now a paleo diet is very high in its carbon footprint. Then omnivore, non-vegetarian, that's kind of the standard American diet. Pescatarian is a little better. Vegetarian with eggs and dairy, a little better. And vegan, you can see, is substantially lower. And this was from a research paper. So I've looked at the research for all of these situations very carefully, and from major scientific journals. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, 2023 for this one. And they looked in terms of kilograms of CO2 equivalents per 1,000 calories. So compared to vegan diets, the carbon footprint is 3.2 times as higher for omnivorous or standard American diets and 4.2 times greater for keto diets. Now, if you're looking at different research papers and are going through this, you will certainly find that there are different numbers quoted in different papers. And don't be surprised that this is the case. The estimates can vary with the year, with the emission sources included. What did they look at in looking at production of a food or a diet? The global warming potential, values used for methane and nitrous oxide. So you will see different numbers say this. So this is specifically for livestock's global carbon footprint. And you'll see different numbers like this. So don't be surprised at that. But we're still finding that the CO2 emissions are drastic. And this Springman paper is a very good one, looking at how to keep the food system within environmental limits. This is one of Corey's slides that I liked. So there's strong scientific consensus that we must limit livestock emissions as much as possible to meet climate targets. And if you want to search on PubMed, just put in PubMed and you'll find yourself fascinated by the range of powerful new articles. And some of them are available in their entirety as free full articles. So more and more scientists and international organizations are linking, and this is a new area we move into, what we put on our forks with both planetary health and human health. So they're saying, like here's the Eat Lancet Commission in 2019. There is, excuse me for the tickle in my throat. This Eat Lancet paper was a very, very important one. It brought together 37 world-leading scientists from across the globe to answer this question. Can we feed a future population of 10 billion people a healthy diet within planetary boundaries? And I've thought about this too. I mean, I lived in India. I've traveled around the world a few times, not doing it so much now because I don't want to use all the transport energy towards global warming, but enough to just see how things are in different parts of the world, and it's going to be very, very devastating for many people. The group of scientists, the 37 world leading scientists, concluded that we can do this, but it will be impossible unless we transform eating habits, improve food production, and reduce food waste. They concluded that to get to the change, to get to our goal, would require global consumption of fruits, vegetables, nuts, and legumes being beans, peas, lentils, soy foods. That would have to double. And consumption of foods such as red meat and sugar will need to be reduced by more than 50%. And they noted a diet rich in these plant-based foods with fewer animal source foods will confer both improved health and environmental benefits. So they're starting to tie in. This isn't just going to be better for the planet, it's going to be better for our health because we have so many papers and research papers and studies that show that this exact shift will keep people healthier. In some of the developing countries, they need to eat more plant foods that will improve their health in various ways. And we in the developed countries need to eat less meat. Okay. And my dad was a physiologist. He worked with Beston Banting, who discovered insulin's use for diabetes. I'm usually very healthy, but I seem to have come across something that triggered my asthma just in the last few days. So I'm really in trouble if I talk too much. Yeah. Now, the Eat Lancet report was followed 6 years later by this Lancet Countdown on Health, and they're emphasizing things even more. This one had, see, it was a lot more scientists came onto this one, and they're all doing this as volunteers. It had nearly 300 authors from 57 universities and international organizations. And they made very strong statements that food systems account for up to 30% of global greenhouse gas emissions. And consumption of red meat and dairy contributed to a 2.9% increase in agricultural greenhouse gas emissions in the past 9 years. So we've had a number of governments getting on board with this. Brazil eat foods mainly of plant origin. We think of Brazil as a beef eating country, but here's their food guidance now. Canada, mostly plant-based. China, cut meat consumption by 50%. Denmark, eat plant-rich. Estonia, plant-based. Germany, mostly plant-based. Netherlands, less meat. Qatar, plant-based. Taiwan, plant-based. UK, more plant-based. What country do you find missing on this? The US doesn't seem to be strongly coming out on this topic yet. So if we consider eating more plant-based or helping your neighbors get more plant-based or your friends and relatives, this question comes up right away every time. Where will I get my protein? And in fact, we know from looking at the large mammals that have very similar systems to ours, the gorillas, the buffalo, the deer, the cows, the horses, these very large animals, giraffes, well-muscled, they're all getting enough protein from plant foods. But people still have this tie-in with meat and eggs. And I remember, I told you I've been a dietitian for a long time. We tie getting protein from animal products. We just have that link solidly built in, probably from school. I know the different lobby groups have influenced school system curriculums, and we've learned that. However, it's time actually to redefine protein quality. And these were viewed as high quality proteins. I remember that myself learning nutrition. But we find now what were considered high quality are actually linked with high rates of mortality and chronic disease. Look at Brenda Davis's presentations in this series, and you'll see some excellent summaries about that. And their production damages our environment in multiple ways. Protein foods, which were once considered lower quality, they're tied in with favorable health outcomes and less environmental impact. So people ask, can we get all the essential amino acids from just from plant foods? And the answer is a resounding yes, because actually all the essential amino acids are made by plants. All plants consider all 9 essential amino acids. The only food that is short an amino acid, entirely lacking, is gelatin, an animal product made from animal bones. So the plant foods all have all 9 essential amino acids. And so we can get the essential amino acids either by eating plants or indirectly by eating animals that ate plants to get their amino acids. It's quite easy to do. And if we think about these as being protein foods, cheese, eggs, ground round beef, um, look at how many calories you get from, say, the protein category or the fat category. You get 24 to 39% calories from protein in the different foods listed here. But look at the calories from fat. Like these should be more considered fat foods rather than protein foods. So we need about 10 to 15% of our calories to come from protein. And this is when you have a calorically adequate diet, not excess, just the right amount of calories to keep you going. And if you look at these foods, where do you think calories from protein are located? Which ones have protein? And what's the percentage calories? So we find, remember the chart with the meat, cheese, eggs. We find that the veggie meats, of course, are way up there, and soybeans, tofu, tempeh, very high, and other legumes, 20, 30% calories from protein. And even seeds have a significant range. I've had to help people, sometimes clients, with raw food diets. And we found that the seeds were very important contributors, hemp seeds particularly, also pumpkin seeds. So they can be important calorie providers and protein providers. Then the non-starchy vegetables and grains are also protein providers. We find that actually about 41% of the world's protein comes from grains, like fed directly to humans, not filtered through a chicken or a cow. And other plant foods, the starchy vegetables have some little protein. In fact, I find some of the sports protein supplements are from potato protein. I was surprised at that. And it's a really good one for muscle building. I was surprised at that. Nuts have a bit less than seeds, and of course they have other features like omega-3s in walnuts, that kind of thing. Calcium in almonds and zinc in cashews. And the one group that doesn't really contribute much is the fruits. So if we look at an overall way to plan your day, it's like about half of the day's food intake would be fruits and vegetables, and a significant amount from legumes and nuts and seeds. And if you want to cut the calories a bit, you can reduce the grains. That one can fluctuate, be a lot higher for athletes, be somewhat lower for people that are trying to cut back. And then we've got other essentials like vitamin B12 being essential on a plant-based diet, vitamin D for a lot of people in North America and many, many countries, iodine, which really varies with the soil content in different parts of the world. So we take these into account and give some specifics. And you can look at the website plantpoweredprotein.com and the food guide there, or the food guide on becomingvegan.ca, and you'll see this food guide. And it's also got a lot more details. So this can help if you're trying to figure out your whole day. And I do this with clients too. So what does plant-based mean? And it's kind of an evolving concept, but it means in general usage that at least 80% of our calories come from plant sources. And so that could include semi-vegetarian, flexitarian, pescatarian, vegetarian, or vegan. And this is an image of the new Canada food guide that was put in place a few years ago. And it's it's actually right on that wavelength. Apparently, somebody figured out that it was 88% plant-based. So some governments are really starting to want their not only the planetary health, but also the health of the people. In Canada, there's a lot of Medicare for people on every income level. And so it's important to keep people healthy and not be having to spend money on all the chronic diseases. Legumes are particularly important for protein because they help the they're on the root nodule, they have bacteria, and these will gain nitrogen. Nitrogen's kind of in air around the root nodules, and that allows the legume to build an amino acids. They gain nitrogen. And so legumes, these are foods that are in pods. So it's the beans, peas, lentils, peanuts. They really help us build protein, very good types. But many North Americans didn't grow up eating legumes, maybe except for peas or some dish that your mom made and it wasn't your favorite. Yet worldwide, legumes are dietary staples and primary protein sources. So just a few examples of that. In Mexico and Spanish countries, we've got pinto beans, black beans, faba beans. I could have had a longer list for all these. India is just the experts. That's where I became vegetarian first, seeing how brilliantly they had managed meals that included lentils and chickpeas, various different beans. The Middle East, they use fava beans or faba, chickpeas, white beans, and in Asia, soybeans and red beans. These are just a few examples. But we wonder, how can we enjoy legumes through the day? And you'll see when I get to a bit later on, we're really encouraging people to include legumes at 3 times a day. So here's some ideas. So at breakfast, for example, you can put peanut butter on toast. I know that's what my husband does a lot. And it's just the quickest, easiest thing. You can have beans on toast or a breakfast burrito, a masala dosa with lentils in the crust part. Soy milk, soy yogurt. They've got some really good pea yogurts now too. And hemp seeds in smoothies or on cereals. Tofu scramble. And of course, you can boost your oatmeal with some of these things, soy milk, hemp seeds, chia seeds, and so on. So they're really good ways to make breakfast a power protein building meal. Lunch and supper, we can have some of these beautiful, and a lot of these pictures are from foods in our books. I personally make, because I'm a senior, very much so, I make a big salad and always have some tofu on it. It's shown breaded here, but sometimes I do it not breaded, just marinated. And you can have bowls with rice, or you can have beans, tofu, or tempeh in stir fries, tacos, kebabs, burgers. There's ethnic bean and lentil dishes, falafels, lasagna. A red lentils and pasta sauce is a really easy one because red lentils cook in 15 minutes, and you can just cook up a huge batch, put it in smaller containers in the freezer, and just pull it out when you need it. I use a Patak's curry paste or some curry paste. It's just the easiest thing. It's got like 3 or 4 ingredients, and you can add things as you have them to fancy it up a bit. And gado, that's this pretty dish on the right. That's from our plant-powered protein. So there's really nice things to do, and it's fun to help your relatives and friends learn some of these different things, and they'll go, oh, yeah, I could do that. I remember the tacos shown here when my kids were growing up. That's one thing we'd have because it allowed for a lot of personal choice. When we were at a stage where we were kind of flexitarian, we'd have some meat as an option, and then gradually the beans got to be more and more appealing, so we just had the bean option. Snacks are really important, and they can be very nutritious. So that's one thing. I have kind of marinated tofu cubes all the time. I just put a little marinade with low sodium tamari, bit of ginger, garlic. It's in our plant-powered protein book. Some rice vinegar and toasted sesame oil. And it's a very, very easy thing to just stick in the air fryer. Or you can have muffins or bars that have some protein ingredients in them. And also things like the sugar snap peas or edamame, the seeds and their cheeses, and then a lot of different kinds of hummus. So all those things really make excellent snacks. And desserts even. So our Kick Diabetes Cookbook, which is actually used by hospitals in New York, has things like chia pudding, black bean brownies, and cranberry lime bliss balls. They're double chocolate surprise cookies, which also have black beans in them, and carrot spice cookies that have seeds in them. So there's ways to get these things to be very nutritious. People will gobble them up. And if we look at which milk is best for the planet, we find that you can compare dairy, rice, soy, or oat. And soy and oat are definitely ones that win at our hip place because they're better for emissions and land use and water use. And they have the soy is the one that has more protein. You look on the package, it can have 6 to 8 grams of protein per cup. Oat and rice and almond are very low in protein. So anyway, you can look at different things. Some common misunderstandings about protein that when people first start, like people really miss cheese. And of course, the plant-based cheeses that are made with seeds are pretty expensive still, but and they use a lot of water. But so people will replace meat with cheese, and it's good to move on to things like pesto. We've got a pesto, the besto, that's made with walnuts, but also has nutritional yeast and lots of basil. But that's something that people really miss at first, and you can find substitutions for that. Not understanding that legumes are very important sources of protein. Believing plant proteins lack amino acids or that we need complementary protein, or thinking that soy is bad. There were some misunderstandings about soy based on a couple of guys that ate a lot of soy, huge amounts, like 20 servings a day, and ended up with getting health problems. But no, you shouldn't be eating 20 servings a day of any food. After they were at distance, and they both happened on this. And anyway, it led to rumors about soy, thinking soy is bad and bad for man, but it isn't at all. Actually, most of the soy that's grown is for animal fodder, just 7% is for humans. And that's usually organic and GMO free. We have actually beneficial associations for soy with all kinds of chronic diseases. And it can be a part of prostate cancer therapy. So instead of being a problem for man, it's actually therapeutic. And if you have your kids having some soy, you reduce their later risks of the different hormone-related cancers. And one of the research studies or areas that have been studied lately is can we use, if you go into a store that sells protein powders, you'll see a lot of them are whey, but they found that that's whey as a byproduct of the milk industry. You'll find that soy is equally as effective as whey in supporting muscle strength. So there are a number of athletes who actually say their performance improved when they were on plant-based diets. And they're in just all kinds of sports. We find that one of the things for muscle building, we want this amino acid leucine. And the recommendation is that you get 42 milligrams of leucine per kilogram of, it's supposed to be healthy body weight, actually. I asked Robert Cheek, who's an author and bodybuilder, what his lunch looked like, and he sent me this picture of his lunch, and it was really a good one, and it's very good in terms of leucine. I was impressed that he sent it, and so. He got 3360 milligrams of leucine in that lunch. And so you can use the mix. He's put on here some beans, some tofu, and then a number of other plant foods. And so athletes can easily, usually eating fairly significant amounts, get enough leucine. But you could use the soy protein instead, soy protein powders. And we recommend the very clean ones that don't have a lot of additives. If we look at, say, a day's menu to get enough leucine and protein, here's an example, just where we've got oatmeal and soy milk. Soy milk's a good choice if you want the leucine and protein. Some tofu at lunch. Of course, we've got other vegetables too, but we're just focusing on the protein foods. So the actual numbers will be higher because we've just put the main ones. Beans and quinoa for supper, and perhaps some toast and peanut butter as a snack. And so this just shows, and we've got over 4,900 milligrams of leucine and over 63 grams of protein in this day. And for sarcopenia, I've been interested in this because, of course, I'm 83. I mean, I'm still keeping very fit. My husband and I hike and go around the lake every morning, and I do 7 fitness classes a week of different types, including strength, endurance, aerobics, yoga, and even one self-defense class with a bit of jujitsu in it. So anyway, that's a really important part of the whole thing. But you do need to get your protein. And if somebody's got very limited appetites, it can be hard to meet these goals. So you could use supplemental leucine or branched chain amino acid powders or protein powder. And you can easily get the protein up where you want, although we prefer whole foods. So we're trying for legumes 3 times a day. And the top right here is these little marinated tofu cubes put in the air fryer. That's a really easy one just to keep. You can grab them. They're good like potato chips. These are the athletes that improved. Here's some Olympic medalists that have been vegan and touted it widely. And just to dip briefly into subsidies, we find that, say, the national guidelines in the US are showing that we should be eating like this pattern with half the plate fruits and vegetables. Yet look at where the subsidy money goes. It's just mostly to meat and dairy and hardly any to fruits and vegetables or legumes. It just doesn't make any sense. The Canadian arrangement is different. With most of these subsidy, it's called supply management payments. They don't call it subsidies, but they get, dairy has done lobbying very effectively to get the money to go there. And one other thing I want to mention was just a tip when you go traveling to use the Happy Cow website. You can set it up so that you get either, whoops, oh, that was the Canadian one. I didn't forward it. I'm going to go back, show you the Canadian one again. So in Canada, dairy gets a significant share of the agricultural support money, and they're also a strong lobby group. Now, with this happycow.net website, you just put in, I put in here Times Square, New York, and set one of the choices to be within 18 miles and looked for vegan restaurants, the green option here, and had this. And then I looked at also veg options if we were going and we wanted vegan, and to make sure we had some meat or non-dairy or dairy options as well. If you're chatting after or have questions, you can certainly send in things that either that your solutions or questions about affordability and accessibility. We'll see what we can come up with. And I'm also doing a presentation on April 17th with a doctor who's originating from New Zealand, but we'll be talking about diet and disease prevention. I won't have my throat tickle from in the end too. And why the plant-based advantage? Well, we know that plant-based diets minimize pathogenic dietary components and maximize protective. And these are some of our books and that are well known all over the place and are online. And next, we've got Corey coming up. And so I'm going to share the screen or ask him to share his screen. And John, the tech guy, will change this. So here are our email addresses and websites. And it's an honor. There's Corey. Okay. Can we hear
Hey,
you?
I sure hope so. Can you hear me all right, Vesanto?
Yeah, that's
And
good.
all right, thanks. So I won't share my screen just yet. And I'm not entirely sure what questions will be asked. So if I have a slide to address a question, I will. Otherwise, we could just chat about it.
I'll stop sharing.
That's good.
Okay, good. Whoops, I think I stopped. What did I do?
Yep, you stop sharing. So it's
Okay,
just you and me now. And
okay,
looking
good.
forward to any questions.
Hey guys. So, all right, give me 1 second here. Oh, I think I misunderstood that I had it that she was going to be asking you questions, but I guess you're just
Ah,
general
No,
questions.
he knows a lot. He's good.
All right. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Just give me one moment here. So, and you put up the books and people know how to get in touch with you. So that is great. Just give me 1 second here to get situated.
Do people get to see this after?
Yeah, this is recorded and
Mhm.
it'll be made public. So so people can see it. The people who are premium members will be able to see it tomorrow, and people who are just be posted like over time, uh both in clips and in whole over the next few months. So so your work, okay, so um your work mentions a significant difference in greenhouse gas emissions between beef and tofu. Can you provide more specifics on the figures on this comparison?
Can you say that one, Corey? You know, from
yeah,
Cory's work. Yeah. Do you want to do it?
You bet. Give me a second. I'll just share my screen because I'll reshare that that slide you had. There we go. About per 100 grams of protein. So when we think about greenhouse gas emissions, mostly we think about cars and things like that. But we know that agriculture is a significant contributor to emissions. So per gram of protein, beef still emits roughly 25 times more um, than tofu, 39 times more than pulses, and 113 times more than peas. And these figures, it comes from the Joseph Poor and Nemisek paper, of course, incorporate land use change, on-farm energy, feed production, transport emissions, offering a more holistic view of food-related climate emissions. So, and these environmental contrasts, you could see, the top half of this graph is mostly red and yellow, and the bottom half is dominated by plant products. And this contrast, it reflects fundamental biological inefficiencies. Cows are ruminants. They emit large amounts of methane through enteric fermentation, and they require vast quantities of feed and water, which contributes indirectly to CO2 as well, and also nitrous oxide emissions. I have a few
Wha-
more slides if we could
One
talk
of the
about.
things I was surprised at was that a lot of the grass-fed beef that we get in North America is from Australia and New Zealand because they have the room to do that more than, and
Mm.
it was a significant proportion. Like it was very surprising. We've got these huge industrial operations, but and you think of it, ranchers in the plains and all that, but the amount of beef people eat, a lot of it comes, it's shipped from far away, and that's adding to the greenhouse gas emissions.
You know what? That's a really interesting observation because from the mid 1900s to today, the amount of small scale farming operations for animal agricultures has intensified so dramatically over that time. And part of that reason why is that cattle ranching in particular, and I don't mean to pick on cattle ranching, but it's not all that lucrative. A lot of them are just straddling along those boundaries of profitability. And so, in order to create the economies of scale to sustain our hunger for meat, we need to create efficiencies in the supply chain. So, we often see small scale ranchers. There's a lot of them, like small family farms, with 100 head of cattle or even less, or maybe more. And they're family owned, and those are the folks we see. Those are my neighbors. They're my peers as an agrologist. Fantastic, wonderful people. And where I live in BC, these ranchers, the family ranchers, they raise the cattle to be about 600 to 900 pounds at about 9 to 11 months of age. That's about 11 in human years before they're auctioned off in the fall. And at this stage, they're transported to Alberta, and over 90% of the cattle raised in British Columbia get transported across the Rocky Mountains to Alberta to just a few feedlot farms. These are intensive livestock operations. That's what we call them in Canada, ILOs. In the United States, you call them CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations. And there, they'll be fed a grain diet. And these are massive operations. I mean, just east of Lethbridge in Alberta, we have what we call Feedlot Alley. And at any one time, they're holding more than 100 or more than 1 million cows at any one time. So just massive. They'll be fed a grain diet. It's barley rich in Canada. That's barley grows really well here in the temperate climates. In the United States, uh, the beef is fed a lot of corn. And actually, that creates a distinction in terms of flavor between Canadian beef and American beef. And there, they'll be brought up to slaughter rate around 1,400 pounds at just 18 months of age, 16 in human years. So they're almost doubling their weight at these feedlots, and that creates the efficiency, right? And that's what the ranchers don't see. These family farms, right? They're disconnected from it. They auction it off. It goes to these big factory farms where they're fattened up very, very fast and then processed, or they go through the slaughtering and manufacturing stage. So it's about 2 to 3 pounds a day is what they'll gain at these factory farms. And then they go to the factory slaughterhouse before the processing manufacturing, then to wholesale merchants before export, going to restaurants or retail, or oftentimes it can be shipped back to that same ranch. So it's all packaged up and sold locally as local beef. Super high cumulative impact. So really interesting observation. So that was to address the economics of beef, to create the economies of scale, to make it something that's a viable industry. And even then, it's supplemented through taxpayer funding and supports. So there's a lot of support networks for ranchers and the feedlots, especially. Really interesting observation, Vesanto, because of course, if we were to move towards more regenerative grazing practices that cuts out the role of these big feedlots, well, you would need about 2.5 times more land to accommodate. The cows take longer to grow to slaughter weight, and so they're emitting more methane. Methane emissions, it's part of the digestive. So cattle, they chew the grass and it comes back up as chud, and so they could digest it again. And the burping creates a lot of those emissions. So the longer the cow lives, the more emissions they're going to create per pound of beef. And then if you take into account, of course, the amount of land they need, here in British Columbia, we don't have the same kinds of grasslands as they do in the prairies. We didn't have bison, which cattle are purported to mimic in the prairies. And so a lot of deforestation occurred outside of the Great Plains to accommodate cattle ranching as well, which often goes unacknowledged in the sphere, at least with my colleagues. And
Corey, I'll say something. Somebody's
Mhm.
interested in the whole lysine and branched chain amino
Yeah.
acids, and these are really present in foods like soy and in the legumes. So leucine is one of the branched chain amino acids, or it's actually the most potent one in muscle building. So people could have a little bit, added to something, or they could use the branched chains as a group, and or they could just use beans, which is certainly our preferred, because then you get also a lot of iron and zinc and all sorts of things. Yeah. And it's, when I see the research on it, we don't have really strong studies to know exactly how much you should have. So you'll see widely different recommendations without enough solid backing scientifically.
So, almonds often get vilified for the amount of water that they consume. How do almonds, first of all, how much water do almonds actually use relative to other sources of food, such as animal products, I guess beef in particular?
They're huge. Like they really take a lot of water, those trees. It's surprising. There are other kinds of nuts that don't seem to be quite as damaging, but I know it's a very big issue in California, where the almonds are basically grown. Corey, have you got things to
Yeah,
add?
and you had a brilliant slide showing the differences between almond milk and dairy milk and the
Yeah,
water use required. And I'd say that it does vary quite a bit depending on where you're growing. Of course, if you're growing in a dry, hot climate, those trees are going to need more water. And California is a great producer of almonds that does require quite a bit of water.
yeah.
If we want to think about California and water usage, though, I've got to think about beef and dairy more so, as it's the lead driver of water scarcity and fish impairment in the United States. So huge amounts of alfalfa crops and things like this also require water. So I like to think about it in relative terms. Mind you, because almond milk, especially from California, does take quite a bit of water, it's really good to just eat a diverse diet, right? Have a bit of almond milk sometimes. Almonds are really nutritious. Eat some. Nobody eats a steak-sized amount of almonds, we've got to take that into consideration as well when we're comparing things like almonds with beef. One serving of almonds is quite a lot smaller, maybe an ounce versus like a 6-ounce steak. And almond water, well, it's made with a lot of water. So when I make almond milk at home, I take the handful of almonds and then you blend it with a ton of water and you put it through a milk bath. So it's mostly just water straight, not the water that you're using for irrigation. And you end up with quite a bit of almond milk per a small amount of almonds. So something to consider as well.
And how about other nuts such as cashews? I know that in a plant-based diet, a lot of people make sauces and creams out of cashews. What kind of environmental impact do cashews have?
They don't seem to be as much, but what I've thought of, well, first of all, personally, I've switched more to oat milk because it seems to have more pluses and it tastes okay. I found soy milk I didn't really like in my tea, but you juggle around and find one. But oat milk seemed a good choice, and soy milk if you want protein. And one of the things I've been interested in seeing for seeds is that if we could have the cheeses from pumpkin seeds, and I only see one company that's doing that so far, but that would be a plus because they seem to grow better without all the environmental problems of almonds. Yeah.
So with dairy, and I think you alluded to it a little bit, that dairy often people look at it as somehow not harmful to animals and not harmful to land.
Yeah.
Can you speak more on dairy and the truth behind its impact both in terms of animals and the land?
Well, I'll say a little bit is that the cows would live to 102, not 118, but to 18 normally, and they get to live to 6, which is, guess what happens? They go off to, they call it to market. Well, guess where that is? Yeah. Anyway, and they turned into hamburgers. So that's one downside of it. But dairy has some pluses if you just look at it straight nutritionally, but we're finding it tied in with prostate cancer as a problem in relatively large amounts. Corey, do you want to add some things about dairy?
Yeah, sure. I'll just mention that large dairy operations, I mean, these are massive factory farms. So they do have an incredible amount of permanent land use change. When you look at these operations, I mean, they're quite industrial at scale, right? And they still require feed, right? And the food that we're feeding them, there's not all that great. They're ultra processed foods, but if you're interested in that, but they also live a lot longer than beef cows. So the methane emissions is constant over their lifetime. And when we think about, we showed the beef herd cattle versus the dairy cattle and how dairy cows have a lot lower impact on climate, but that's per 100 grams of food protein produced, right? And so we're splitting that amongst all the dairy they produce over their life as well. Just something to consider when we're thinking about those dairy operations. Yeah, and I'd like to also mention that dairy cows, they're a different breed than beef cows, right? And so at the end of their life, yes, it goes into beef production, but the male cows that are born, it's not all that economical to raise them as beef cows because they're not as big. So the amount of work to produce the amount of beef isn't all that profitable. So they often end up just being killed. And dead bodies presents another environmental hazard, right? That requires quite intense management of that biohazardous material to prevent any impacts to the receiving environment, right?
Oh, and then all the little boy calves that are born become veal if they're not
Not
killed right away.
always. Yeah, if they're not
Yeah,
killed right away, they
yeah.
might
So
be turned
they
into
live
veal.
in these tiny little, it would be like a tent for one, tiny tent for one, completely isolated for 6 weeks, and then they're sent off to slaughter. So they have pretty tragic lives, but that's half of the output when we can only get milk by a cow getting pregnant. And then her pregnancy has an outcome, and the outcome is this little veal calf half the time, or a female that can become a dairy cow. So the whole situation is quite real distressing if you see it. And the separation of the calves from the mother cow is a very traumatic time for both as well.
And because of the large scale of a lot of these dairy operations, the manure management issue could be quite difficult at times. So even when they're following all of the laws and regulation and everything's going to plan, there still is a risk of contamination. And in Canada, there's been many companies who've been fined or sanctioned for manure spills into that contaminated rivers, leading to fish kills and eutrophication, which causes severe ecological impacts. And same thing in the United States. There was one, and I can't remember where. I wish I had the source here, but some biologists went to the river that was contaminated before it was contaminated, identified 9 significant species of fish. 2 years after there was a hog manure spill in the river, they found none of those fish species. So these impacts from manure spills are long lasting and can take quite a lot of public effort to restore. And not all of that impact is felt by industry, or not all of that responsibility is on the industry.
So, can you explain the difference? So when people talk about greenhouse gases, they tend to think of CO2. Can you explain the difference between CO2 and methane, where they each come from, and what the impact of each are, as well as how they both leave the atmosphere over time?
Let me share my screen on this one, Vesanto, if you want me to take that on.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, you bet. So notoriously, agricultural greenhouse gas emissions, you got methane, nitrous oxide, and carbon dioxide. Now, methane, over 100-year timeline, methane will break down into carbon dioxide and water over that time, right? So when first emitted into our atmosphere, though, methane is 120 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Well, over 20 years, while over 100 years, it's 20 times more potent in the atmosphere. So you could see that sort of here, methane CO2 equivalents over time. So it breaks down into carbon dioxide in our atmosphere, and there it will live for a long time as carbon dioxide. So regenerative grazing, when we think about that, it claims that an ability to sequester that carbon, although might require a lot more land to do so. And yes, grasslands do sequester carbon. Cows eat the grass, they emit methane, and the ecosystem sequesters carbon into the soils or into the plants. But they don't sequester methane directly, or not a lot. In some places, there might be tiny amounts of methane that are sequestered, but not in any material sense. So when we think about this, we need action on climate change now, right? Not over the course of 100 years. So what we really need to do is think about methane over the short term. Nitrous oxide, of course, is, and so this is just showing if we're continually emitting methane into our atmosphere through beef crops, well, we're continually having quite high atmospheric impacts, right? Nitrous oxide is another quite serious greenhouse gas with global warming potential. We mentioned methane being, 20 times more potent than carbon dioxide over 100 years. Methane, however, is almost 300 times that of carbon dioxide over a 100-year period. And animal agriculture actually contributes to nitrous oxide emissions through the use of synthetic fertilizers and largely manure management practices. Of course, the hotter climate you get, the more impacts from this you'll get. So in Canada, where it's more of a temperate climate, there's less volatilization of the manure, which makes it a little bit easier to manage because it will volatilize and create these nitrous oxide emissions, right? And hotter climates that happens a lot faster. It breaks down a lot faster, making the management of it much more difficult. So it's really about the storage and handling of manure, and then how you're applying synthetic fertilizers. And then there's the carbon dioxide, largely through energy, right? You're operating buildings for slaughter, processing, milking, feeding, land use change, and transport. And, I told you about 95% of all cattle raised here in BC, they're auctioned off and they go, they're shipped quite far. But with that said, road transport, burning fuels to propel road vehicles forward, are responsible for about 12% of greenhouse gas emissions. The shipping sector as a whole is about, and sorry, I don't have that slide here. It doesn't look like, is about 1.6% of total agricultural or total greenhouse gas emissions, right? And so that's the portion that we're thinking about when we're thinking about transport of agricultural products across the world. And one thing that we often don't talk about when we're thinking about the carbon cost of food, we often talk about, avocados being shipped and, all of these vegetable products and fruit products being shipped from all over the world. Well, I'll tell you that animal feed, huge, vast quantities, are being shipped all around the world, and these are UPFs. They like us to think that cattle, for example, eat only grass, hay crops when they need it. They oftentimes practice this creep feeding, so they're slowly introducing grains into their diet at the pasture to increase their acceptance of grains at the feedlot. Now, in Canada, we combine, cows used for beef and dairy. They consume by far the majority of feed in Canada. And so these are the grains and things that we feed them.
And what are UPFs?
So UPFs are ultra processed foods. So these are ultra processed foods that we're feeding our livestock. They're processed with added vitamins and minerals, anti-caking agents, flavoring agents, pelleting aids, mold inhibitors, acidifiers, antibiotics, and other veterinary health products. And on the backdrop, there's this massive global trade with animal feed being shipped around the world, province to province, state to state, continent to continent, in a massive global trade. I was just in the Marshall Islands last year, where I toured a very small pig farm. It was also an organic farm. Whoops. It was also an organic farm growing all kinds of fruits and vegetables, but they were shipping in feed from the Philippines. So this figure to the right shows feed net exporting countries in the bluer range and importing countries in the brown range. Now, note that the countries in the blue range, they still import feed. It's just that they export more feed than they import. And Europe is a really huge importer. The figure to the left shows where they got imports, solely derived from soy for animal feed and oil production, mostly from South America, tropical countries like Brazil alone representing a footprint of 8.8 million hectares. In total, they imported 27 million tons of soy for these purposes, around 700,000 18-wheeler semi-truckloads. Okay, just an astonishing number. And this doesn't include cereal grains used for feed like maize, wheat, rye, barley, millet, all those, or even fish meal. And so to put that into perspective, a semi-truck is about 22 meters long. Bumper to bumper, this would create a 15,400 kilometer lineup of semi-trucks. You would have to drive from Seattle, Washington to Florida by road, back to Seattle, then back to Florida, and still not cover that distance. So this is a massive global trade to produce local beef and local chicken. So they could call it local, but they're shipping in soybeans from the Amazon. And I'll tell you, about 75% of the soy grown worldwide for animal feed, I mean, it's coming from the United States and Brazil, from the Amazon and Cerrado areas of Brazil in particular are hit hard by that.
So how much would we have to reduce the amount of animal consumption in order to make the impact of the way that we eat on greenhouse gases no longer an issue?
The Paris group are saying 50% reduction. And then a lot of the poorer countries would need to increase their vegetables and grains and so on. Yeah, so 50%. I mean, if we could get it right down, we'd really be in good shape, but that's a start. Yeah. I wanted to say things about pig manure, because you probably need to know more about that. But this US's 9.7 million pigs produce 10 billion gallons of pig excrement each year. So that's just pigs. You can imagine the amounts of this stuff. That's a lot centered around Carolina, but the chicken operations are in a lot of trouble too, with all the excrement. So that just looking at some of the other animal industrial situations.
Um, that's a really good, that's really interesting.
Yeah, I know.
Vesanto.
I've just
Yeah.
found it when I was
Okay.
reading through this. If got into more depth, preparing for this, making sure there was really good backup on every point, and going, "What? That's unbelievable."
Is anyone good at disposing of this feces or waste or whatever you're supposed to call it? Is anyone actually getting it right? Is there any good way of getting rid of it without, given that, all of the things that you named in the feed, that, the anti-caking agents and all that type of stuff, that are clearly getting into our water supply and our environment at large. Anyone doing it right? And is there a right way?
Yeah,
Well, I
some
think,
farmers are trying. I'll let Corey expand on that. Yeah, because he's out
yeah,
there with these
I
guys.
think there's better ways than others, right? Oftentimes the biggest problem is the over fertilizing the crops. So they use the manure, or they try to use the manure for fertilizer for crops, right? And so that's one way to do it. But to do it right, probably a little bit less. So what they're doing is manure's really great at delivering a large quantity of nutrients fast. And so that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do targeted nutrient uptake for the plants, whereas compost, for example, provides a less amount of nutrients, but sustained over a long period of time and provides soil structure and things like that. One of the biggest issues is runoff from manure because it is quite slick. And so when it rains and you get a lot of runoff, it easily goes into the receiving environment. And because it can disperse those nutrients really fast, that's why that's a big threat for eutrophication and the dead zone thing. And so that's one thing you want to think about. Also, when you're dispersing it onto those fields, you've got to be a little bit cautious, or at least you should think about the volatilization of that material. And so you do want it to be covered by your crops to protect it from the sun, or else it'll volatilize into the nitrous oxides and ammonias.
I've got a really funny one too. Some researchers have found that they created these condensed tannin extracts, a byproduct of the biofuel industry. So the fuel alcohol goes off to be added to fuel, and these condensed tannin extracts can be used by the cows. They add it to the cattle feed, and then they don't fart as much. It's amazing. So these actually affect the microorganisms in the rumen that produce methane. Now, they have found that they get less milk yield if it's dairy cows, or they get digestive problems, but they're trying all these things. Like they're just trying and trying and trying
Yeah.
in different ways. And at least they could bring it down somewhat. I mean, it's such a huge difference. And all those figures that we showed were not the high end, they were averages. So some farmers are doing it really well, and we appreciate their huge efforts.
And a
And
lot of that is due to where they're located, right?
yeah, that's
In
right.
terms of what they're producing and where.
Yeah.
And so, that's why in Canada we grow a lot of barley for our cattle. About 80% of the barley we grow goes to animal feed here because it grows really well here, and it's fairly lower impact when it compared to if we were trying to grow corn up here for our livestock. That would be a much bigger impact than it would be in the southern United States, just because we're aligning our agriculture with our climate. And so if you're growing beef in areas, um, where bison or other analogous animals weren't, you're probably going to have different impacts. In cooler climates, it's going to be less impactful than in warmer climates just because of how heat degrades manure and so forth. Yeah. And
So,
also one of the things about manure is there's also pathogens. So some people do a really great job of trying to remove the pathogens. They'll make manure compost before spreading it onto the land rather than just directly spreading manure on the land. So some farmers do raw manure on the land. Some actually try and compost it and get rid of some of the pathogens and so forth to for better application, I guess. So lots of different strategies out there. One of the better management strategies for cattle ranchers might be if they're trying to have one holistic system is doing rotational cropping, cover cropping. So that means that they'll have the cattle go out and eat some of the crop. So in rotation, right? So they'll have like a leguminous style crop that the cattle can eat, and then they'll defecate in the land and they'll use that and try and make it more holistic. And actually, yeah, that would lower the impact, which is great. And always I really encourage ranchers who are doing this to try and explore better ways to manage their land.
so are you saying that they would feed the leguminous, I guess it's like plants with legumes, like like the bean kind of plants. So to feed the cows, let them go to the bathroom, on the land, and then fertilize the land without moving it elsewhere, and then move on to another field. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, and so that's one of the things. So legumes, as Visanto mentioned, they fix nitrogen, right? And so part of great rotational cropping systems is you might grow legumes on there one year and then something more productive the next year or something more economical the next year, right? Lots of different kinds of leguminous plants that aren't commercial, right? So often they'll do that. They'll do like all kinds of different crops and allow the cattle to come and eat and so forth.
So let's say,
And,
oh, go ahead.
and then the next season, then they'll grow something different, and the cattle will go to a different place, right? And so you're spreading the impact over time, letting the land heal a bit, but you're also using those legumes to improve the soil for your more cash crops.
So, earlier I was asking, what level we need to lower it down so that we were neutral, which you said about 50% of where we are with regard to animal products. Is there a point where, like we need a certain number of these animals or where we can lower it too low? Let's say we were able to magically wave a wand to get it down to zero. Would that have a negative impact or would that be great? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think we
Let's
definitely
give
need
it
to
a
be.
try.
Uh, yeah, I think we should be reducing it as much as we can. Especially in Western industrial countries, like middle to higher income countries in particular. We don't want one sweeping blow. I mean, there's lots of communities out there that do rely on animal products. They're using a
Yeah.
much smaller scale. They're not building out globally. When I think about the reduction and transition to a plant-based food system, that's exactly what I mean. Like the global food system. It's what's ending up in our grocery stores, right? It's nothing about you and your buddies going out fishing or like having a backyard chicken. Sure, there's issues with backyard chickens and overfishing, but what I'm focused on is this global machine, our food system, which is rapidly degrading our landscape and using a lot of land. And with that, we need to be really cautious that we're not harming cultures and regional economies in ways that could really seriously hurt people. I'm not saying indigenous people shouldn't hunt. They have a right to hunt. And part of transitioning to a plant-based food system means that we could accommodate more wildlife and we could robustify indigenous rights, better environmental conditions in areas that are seriously food scarce and might rely on some animal products. I mean, it makes it easier to grow those animal products without those cumulative impacts from from the global system, right? There's a lot of deforestation that has occurred due to, grazing in particular. I have slides for that. Actually, if you're interested, maybe I'll share my screen
Sure.
really quick. So here we are. It is the countries who are higher income that I would that I recommend we lower. It really has to be these countries, right? I'm not telling Ethiopia you need to cut down your meat 50%. I'm telling United States and Canada here that we need to do that. Let's move through some of these slides. Talked about all that. So I'm talking about ecological health and ecological systems, and of course, to to protect livestock from nature, we regularly kill predators, grizzly bears, black bears in the United States. I mean, we killed over 300 gray wolves, 64,000 coyotes, 500 black bears, 200 mountain lions. The Center for Biological Diversity, Colin Atkins actually, said in response that it's inexcusable that wildlife services continue to target rare and ecologically important animals like wolves, grizzly bears, forcing them to suffer and die in cruel traps and snares. Taxpayer-funded wildlife slaughter needs to stop. That's just in America. In Canada, of course, as well. The wildlife livestock interface, as Johan Dutoit, points out so eloquently, is characterized by management actions aimed at controlling problem animals associated with competition for forage, disease, and depredation, hence the term problem wildlife, nuisance wildlife. So even in areas that we're not deforesting, sterilizing the environment to create pasture, we do need to control animals, right? They target herbivores, like bison, deer, elk, typically for two reasons. Herbivores often compete with livestock for forage, often killed in the name of conservation, right? Because overgrazing results in massive ecological consequences. Here in BC, cattle production started to get really big during the gold rush, like I'm talking late 1800 or mid to late 1800s. Within 4 decades, by early 1900s of cattle ranching getting established here, the land was completely overgrazed. 90% of our central interior or our southern interior grasslands, very important semi-arid grasslands for biodiversity, were overgrazed. Then came the locusts, and then there was the predator execution. They're putting strychnine in every carcass they can. And those ecological impacts, they're still persisting to this day. Colin Atkins again says grass-eating species such as elk, deer, and pronghorn have long been killed en masse to reserve more feed for cattle. Important habitat-creating animals such as beavers and prairie dogs have been decimated because they disrupt the homogeneous landscapes desired by livestock managers. And this is a really important point, homogeneous, right? They want a landscape that is manageable. And it's really nice to have a landscape that is, the particular kinds of grasses that you want for your cattle and so forth, right? Homogeneous. But the problem is we need heterogeneity in our landscape to accommodate biodiversity. We need a diversity of habitat to accommodate a diversity of species. And as a result, we find ourselves in the position where only 4% of the biomass of mammals on Earth are wildlife, just 2% of which are land mammals and 2% marine mammals, like whales, 62% of livestock, goats, pigs, cattle, sheep. This excludes fish and poultry, of course. A figure I find soul-crushingly disturbing because it illuminates how we've squandered away this biodiverse gift we were blessed with to cater to our gluttonous appetite for gore and flesh. But, through conceited efforts, we can help wildlife make a comeback. There are many success stories in Europe, example, as you can see on the diagram to the right. One very important change that allowed for this to happen, the wildlife coming back in Europe, was efficiency for food production, resulting in the ability to use that land to accommodate wildlife. That's what happened. So I hope you could see that massive opportunity because as As Vesanto pointed out, land use is a huge issue. It's very inefficient. And with that, we're deforesting 5 million hectares a year. 75% is driven by uh, agriculture, most of which is for grazing and animal feed. For example, we often talk about palm oil and things like that. Palm oil got a lot of attention for clearing 9 million hectares of forest between 2001 and 2015. While over that same period of time, over 45 million hectares was cleared for pasture alone. That's 4 times more forest than exists in Oregon, almost double that of palm oil, coffee, cocoa, and soy combined. So in North America, millions of hectares have been cleared for agriculture as well, much of which was carved out from old growth forests. And the permanent removal of our trees, it not only impacts our water cycle, right? Because trees take in water through their roots and releases it through their leaves in a process called evapotranspiration, which increases atmospheric moisture and even the cross-continental transport of that moisture, which fuels regional and global water cycles, right? And so can contribute to drought the more deforestation we see.
Can I just say something
Yeah.
with some of our comments that have come in? Like one woman, Jennifer, wrote about Scenic Valley Farm has done research in vermicompost. And so there are people working on these areas to try and make the compost more suitable and organic. And then another person, Wendy, wrote in about growing sprouts on her windowsill or in somewhere in the house, and that's a really good way to have some things growing. We actually have a microgreens cabinet right now. We were donated one and are growing all kinds of things inside. Here's one asking about opinion on the latest fad, saying plant oils are unhealthy and replacing with beef tallow. So that's a funny one. But what we suggest in our books is some really healthy plant food fats, such as the seeds, the avocados. I use tahini dressing, that's sesame seed based, but it's the whole. So I'm hardly using oils at all. My husband likes to use a bit of spray once in a while, but we don't need these. We don't need beef tallow, but we also don't even need the other oils that are extracted from seeds. We can do quite well with just the whole foods. But it's a gradual thing. So I appreciate people watching that you don't have to leap into being 100% whole food plant-based right away. It's a wonderful exploration that happens over time. I know it has for me.
So you brought up seed oils, and they have specifically been vilified as opposed to other oils or beef tallow, in particular. Is there something unique to seed oils? What are the seed oils, right? So olive oil, that's not a seed oil. Is that somehow, so much better than, I think, canola oil is a seed oil, or rapeseed is clearly a seed oil? Is there something unique about the seed oil that deserves its vilification over other oils or other fats?
Um, well, olive oil's a fairly reasonable one to use in little bits, but we went through a period where we thought these oils were beneficial, and we even thought margarine was beneficial, and then we suddenly realized. But what we're really going to is that extracting something out of the seed or out of the beef isn't, we just don't need those kind of things. It's better to go for the whole seed. So you can make a good salad dressing with seeds, and that's the basis. And then you get the minerals, the vitamins, the whole thing that's in this package. And a little seed is so amazing because it was going to grow a great big bush. It just has all this potential. Did that relate to what you were asking? Michael? Or
Yeah, well, it doesn't seem like so the seed. So you spoke more about oil in general. Was there something specific? I mean, it has in certain circles, seed oil has been kind of listed as, I mean, even on the, it's like almost like a conspiracy at this point of how bad it is and that it's kind of being foisted onto us for nefarious purposes. From a dietary and nutritional perspective, is there something uniquely bad about seed oil in particular over other oils or other fats that really warrant this concern?
I think this one passed me by if it got to be a big fad.
Okay.
I don't know. What
Corey,
about you,
Yeah.
Corey, have
Corey?
you seen anything on this on the seed?
Well, I know it was our RFK, you know, he recently visited a fast food joint and praising that they're now using beef towel instead of seed oil or something, or vegetable
Right.
oil, whatever they were using. I never really caught that. Yeah, it was a big thing in the past, the seed oil thing, because I just
I
don't
mean,
generally consume a lot of
rape seeds
oils.
themselves had something toxic in them. So they
Yes, and so
extracted.
rapeseed, canola, you know, that results in you remove the oil, which is edible, but then the rest of the plant, it's not very edible. And there's been a lot of people trying to figure out ways to convert it to animal feed and like even human feed. Some studies have been trying to do that. So really interesting stuff trying to, you know, use the whole plant. But I mean, um,
So we have about 2 minutes left. So, after a talk like this, it has a lot of amazing information, but it's also a little overwhelming on an emotional level to see what we're doing to ourselves. What do you see going on with regard to this field that gives you hope? And we have about 2 to 3 minutes left.
Huh. Well, you guys can give us hope. Here you are with 17 days worth of really interesting presentations. And I find it encouraging too. I have clients from Europe, from across North America that say, "Hey, I'm going vegan and I just want to get it right." Or, it's encouraging. Somebody in Amsterdam on just starting pregnancy. So I think people are really trying, and we're evolving as humans to try and be more compassionate for the earth, to other humans, to animals. So I'm sticking with that group of emerging, and it is powerful. And another thing, you don't eat. I found that a number of vegan restaurants was going down a bit. That's because every restaurant has vegan stuff on their menu. So it's surprising. Okay, Corey.
no, I mean, being plant-based my whole life, born in the 80s, I've seen dramatic change. And what gives me hope is when I share food with people and say, oh, I really love this, and I'll try this at home. And that's really excellent. You know, if they want to increase a little bit more plants in their diet as a result of eating with me or whatever, I mean, that gives me hope. It's the steps in the right direction. And if I take it from the long-term lens, I mean, the pragmatic approach certainly is working. Step by step, we're improving things in public perception, and the literature is reflective of that. So that's really heartwarming to see.
Great. Well, with that, that concludes our time. So I want to thank you so much for all the information that you guys had shared with us. It truly is an inspiration. Visanto and Corey, thank you. If we could unmute the audience so they can.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you, Corey.
you,
Thank you,
everybody.
Visanto. Thank you, Michael.
So much. Hello, everybody.